There was no year when the Count was born. Years were not yet important. Time, then, was measured by rot and rain, by how long grain survived in storage, by how many children lived past winter. He remembered a world where age was guessed by the strength of a man's hands and the depth of a woman's exhaustion. He remembered his mother's fear of decay, not death, decay. She believed death was an event, but decay was a betrayal. She scrubbed wounds obsessively, burned cloth after illness, and whispered prayers not to gods, but to processes she did not understand. His father was a healer in the loosest sense, a man who knew which roots dulled pain, which metals poisoned slowly, which cuts became fatal only because they were ignored. From them the Count learned his first lesson. The body does not fail suddenly. It negotiates its own end. As a child, he watched animals heal with brutal efficiency. Broken bones fused crooked but strong. Infections either killed quickly or vanished entirely. Humans lingered. Humans suffered. Humans decayed while still breathing. This offended him. Even then, he believed failure was a design flaw. He apprenticed young, assisting healers who practiced medicine that blurred into ritual. Blood was taken to balance invisible forces. Powdered metals were swallowed despite the burning. Animals were opened while still warm, their organs studied as if secrets might flee if not caught immediately. He learned to watch faces more than bodies. Fear accelerated death. Hope delayed it. Belief altered outcomes more than ingredients ever did. When early philosophers spoke of the soul departing at death, he listened politely. But he noticed something they did not. The body did not behave as if anything escaped. It behaved as if something stopped. The plague did not announce itself. It never does. It arrived as a rumor carried by merchants, a cough that lingered too long, a fever that returned stronger. By the time priests named it punishment, it had already learned the streets. The Count stayed when others fled, not out of courage, out of necessity. He needed to see how death behaved when it was confident. Bodies filled homes, then alleys, then roads. Entire families collapsed into silence. Healers prayed, failed, and vanished. Rituals multiplied. None worked. It was during this collapse that he found the fragments. Texts translated poorly, copied carelessly, dismissed as heretical nonsense. They did not describe curing disease. They described interrupting conclusions. Death, according to these writings, was not an instant. It was a process with stages. If one could interfere at the correct moment, not prevent, not reverse, but delay, then consequences followed. The Count prepared alone. He wrote no notes meant to survive. He drank mixtures designed not to heal, but to confuse the body's timing. He slowed his breath deliberately, lowered his pulse, starved himself to quiet the system. When his heart stopped, it was intentional. There was no tunnel of light, no revelation, only suspension. When awareness returned, it did so reluctantly. His lungs rejected air at first, then accepted it. Pain arrived late, like an afterthought, and something else arrived with it. Time no longer claimed him. Wounds sealed with alarming speed, fever fled, hunger became negotiable. Sleep never felt complete again, as if some part of him remained permanently alert, waiting for a signal that never came. The plague ignored him. Others noticed. The world did not end when Rome collapsed. It narrowed. Roads cracked, trade thinned, languages fractured into dialects that barely recognized one another. Knowledge did not disappear, it withdrew like an animal sensing danger. And through this shrinking world the Count walked unchanged. At first he thought the Dark Ages would be easy. No records, no scholars, no questions. He was wrong. When people forget how things work, they invent reasons instead, and those reasons always need something to blame. The weight of memory. He carried too much memory into an era that feared it. He remembered aqueducts while villages fought over wells. He remembered written law while justice became personal again. He remembered cities while humanity retreated into clustered fear. The Count learned quickly that knowing too much was more dangerous than knowing nothing. He spoke less. He watched more. But even silence could not protect him forever, because time still passed for everyone else, and it did not pass for him. The world did not end when Rome collapsed. It narrowed. Roads cracked, trade thinned, languages fractured into dialects that barely recognized one another. Knowledge did not disappear, it withdrew, like an animal sensing danger. And through this shrinking world, the Count walked unchanged. At first, he thought the Dark Ages would be easy. No records, no scholars, no questions. He was wrong. When people forget how things work, they invent reasons instead, and those reasons always need something to blame. The weight of memory. He carried too much memory into an era that feared it. He remembered aqueducts while villages fought over wells. He remembered written law while justice became personal again. He remembered cities while humanity retreated into clustered fear. The Count learned quickly that knowing too much was more dangerous than knowing nothing. He spoke less. He watched more. But even silence could not protect him forever, because time still passed for everyone else, and it did not pass for him. He stayed in one settlement longer than he should have. It was small, barely more than a cluster of wooden homes pressed against a forest that felt too close, too watchful. He arrived as a helper, a pair of hands, a man willing to work without complaint. Years passed. Children grew. Men stooped, women hardened, and the Count remained steady. At first people called it good fortune, then they called it strange. Then they stopped calling it anything at all and simply watched. Fear does not announce itself, it accumulates. A glance held too long, a conversation that quiets when someone enters, a priest who studies instead of blesses. The Count recognized the pattern too late. One night, someone asked him his age. He answered carefully, too carefully. The next morning, symbols appeared on his door, old ones, protective ones, desperate ones. That night, he left. He did not run, he vanished. By dawn, there was no trace he had ever been there, and the village told itself that whatever had frightened them was gone. They were wrong. Monasteries and the illusion of safety. The Count learned that the only places still willing to tolerate knowledge were monasteries, stone buildings, cold halls, men devoted to preservation without understanding. He entered them humbly, a penman, a cleaner, a silent presence in the margins, and there he did something strange. He copied texts he already knew by heart: scripture, philosophy, mathematics, medicine. He copied them not to learn, but to remember remembering, because something had begun to frighten him more than fire or steel: forgetfulness. Memory, when stretched across centuries, does not behave kindly. Details erode, faces merge, events overlap until certainty dissolves. The Count feared that one day he would still exist, but no longer know who existed. So he wrote, relentlessly. He watched libraries burn, not in great spectacles, but quietly. A manuscript repurposed as binding, a scroll scraped clean to reuse the parchment, a book dismissed as heretical because no one remembered how to read it correctly. The Count learned a bitter truth. Civilization does not fall loudly. It misplaces itself. And he remembered everything it misplaced. This made him dangerous. The first accusation. It happened in winter. It always did. Cold sharpens suspicion. A monk fell ill, then another. The Count did not. They noticed. Someone whispered that he did not age. Someone else said they had seen him decades earlier, unchanged. The abbot questioned him gently at first, then firmly, then with fear poorly disguised as concern. The Count answered truthfully, but selectively. It was not enough. One night he overheard prayer spoken not for salvation, but for protection from him. He left before sunrise. By the time the monastery discovered his absence, they had already decided he was dangerous. They burned the cell he had occupied. The fire did not cleanse anything, but it made them feel safer. The family he should not have had. Loneliness, like hunger, eventually overpowers caution. He tried again. He chose a remote region, poor, isolated, a place where years blurred naturally. He married. She was kind, practical. She did not ask questions. At first, they had children, and for a brief, terrible period, he pretended he was normal, pretended time would forgive him. It did not. His children aged. He did not. At first, they laughed about it. Then they noticed. Then they resented it. His wife noticed last, and when she did, the realization hollowed her. She aged rapidly after that, not physically, but inwardly, as if her body was trying to flee a truth it could not escape. She died before she was old. The Count buried her. He buried his children later. They looked like him in death. That was the last time he tried to be a father. The Count walked through the forests of Europe as the world shifted again. The Crusades had begun, armies moving like tides, driven by faith so absolute that reason was discarded. He watched men march under banners, believing themselves chosen, convinced that God's hand guided their every step. He observed sieges that lasted months, cities reduced to dust, and the screams of those who refused to kneel. The Count did not fight. He did not pray. He moved among the chaos like a shadow that had always existed, untouched, unnoticed, observing the consequences of belief wielded as a weapon. Entire villages vanished in a single day. Families were executed in the name of salvation. And through it all, the Count remembered faces, names, and the smell of burning flesh. Humanity had learned how to destroy itself efficiently, and he learned to hide within it. He stayed in one encampment for months, watching a boy no older than 10 perform tasks meant for men, watching him grow older, stronger, while he remained exactly the same. The boy eventually noticed the Count's unchanging features, the permanence in a world that devoured everyone else. The boy asked questions he should not have, and the Count gave answers cloaked in riddles. That night he left. The encampment awoke to chaos, believing the mysterious observer had vanished as if he had never been there, unaware that the Count had been the only one who had seen the unfolding disaster clearly. As the centuries turned, he moved through Renaissance Europe, where art noticed him. Painters captured his likeness too accurately. Scholars questioned his consistency, and every commission he funded ended with a subtle panic in the artist's eyes. He was wealth without origin, knowledge without history, permanence without explanation. He read every new manuscript, memorized every philosophical treatise, and left before curiosity could harden into fear. He learned to manipulate identity with sophistication now, using mirrors of language, clothing, and status to avoid attention. Even as empires grew and science emerged, he remained one step ahead, always invisible, always remembered only when convenient. When the first hospitals appeared, he avoided them. Doctors now measured rather than prayed, dissected instead of healed, and his immortality was no longer a secret easily ignored. Friends, if he allowed himself to have any, were examined post-mortem, their bodies scrutinized in ways he had never imagined in antiquity. He learned that knowledge itself could be a trap, that to survive he must hide from both fear and fascination. He moved constantly, appearing as new identities, leaving behind false histories, only to repeat the same cycle decades later. Time no longer passed for him, but he carried the weight of it in every memory, every wound that had healed, every life that had been lost around him. The Count survived wars with industrial death and fire, the mechanized slaughter of the world wars, when humanity learned to kill millions with precision and efficiency. Trenches, gas, bombardments, he endured them all. He watched soldiers die by the thousands, often those he had known, by some cruel accident or chance resemblance to someone he remembered from centuries past. Entire continents burned in conflict, and he walked through rubble unchanged, indifferent in his own body, but mourning continuously in his mind. Cities rose and fell, governments changed, borders shifted, technology raced forward, and yet he remained, a constant witness to humanity's cyclical self-destruction. Finally, the Count survived wars with industrial death and fire, the mechanized slaughter of the world wars, when humanity learned to kill millions with precision and efficiency. Trenches, gas, bombardments, he endured them all. He watched soldiers die by the thousands, often those he had known, by some cruel accident or chance resemblance to someone he remembered from centuries past. Entire continents burned in conflict, and he walked through rubble unchanged, indifferent in his own body, but mourning continuously in his mind. Cities rose and fell, governments changed, borders shifted, technology raced forward, and yet he remained, a constant witness to humanity's cyclical self-destruction. Finally, the modern era arrived, and the Count observed a world that recorded everything. Cameras captured moments he could not erase. Databases catalogued faces he could no longer conceal. The digital age threatened to make the invisible visible, to expose the permanence he had tried so carefully to conceal. He learned to navigate it, to adapt his methods, to blend into the endless flow of information. And yet, for the first time in 2,000 years, he feared that the net of human memory, of technology, of relentless documentation might finally ensnare him. He had survived every plague, every fire, every war, every accusation, but now the world itself was aligned against him, a conscious observer that would not forget. He exists, if he exists at all, in the shadow of every city, every street, every photograph. He moves silently among the living, appearing as an ordinary person, as someone mundane, but he is anything but. He carries every scream, every sigh, every betrayal, and every whisper of history within him. He remembers what humanity has chosen to forget, and he bears that memory as both a gift and a curse. He has no companions, no allies, no lasting love, because anyone who grows close inevitably ages, dies, or notices, and he vanishes before suspicion hardens into understanding. Time is his companion, his tormentor, and his only friend, and yet it cannot claim him. The weight of centuries presses upon his shoulders, and the knowledge of all that has been and will be haunts him relentlessly. He does not intervene.
He watches, he remembers, he records silently in ways no one can comprehend, leaving traces of knowledge that will be rediscovered long after mortals have passed. And somewhere, in a quiet cafe, a shadowed alley, or a crowded street, he waits, perhaps for nothing, perhaps for everything. He is patient, inexorable, and permanent, for the Count has learned what few can, that immortality is not liberation, it is endurance, and endurance is an eternity of witnessing, of remembering, and of being utterly alone, even in the company of millions. And in that he is more terrifying than death itself.
Time has stretched so thin around him that decades pass like moments, and yet each memory remains as vivid as the day it was formed. He moves through cities that never sleep, through subways, airports, and office buildings, unnoticed, unremarkable, blending into the machinery of daily life. He watches people grow attached to fleeting joys, to temporary passions, to ephemeral trends, and he remembers how fleeting all of it is. He has seen entire empires rise and vanish, seen ideologies consumed by their own contradictions, and still he walks among the living, unchanged. Technology has created new dangers, new ways for humans to try and capture permanence, yet it also creates new ways for him to vanish. Cameras, satellites, biometric systems. He studies them all, adapts, manipulates. Every identity he assumes is layered upon the last, a palimpsest of survival that no algorithm can fully decipher. He changes names, residences, professions, even minor mannerisms, leaving traces just enough to be plausible, but never enough to be found. And still he watches, always. The world has not become safer. It has only become more precise, more capable of documenting its own violence, and he absorbs it all. He has witnessed the slow erosion of memory itself in society. People trust technology to remember for them, forgetting even the smallest details, storing them in devices that may fail or become obsolete. He, on the other hand, cannot forget. Each face, each event, each misdeed and act of kindness is etched into him permanently. It is a burden that grows heavier with each passing year. A photograph, a news clip, a viral video, these are echoes to him, reminders that the world records everything, but still does not truly understand anything. He observes humanity now in its contradictions, the simultaneous striving for progress and the repetition of ancient mistakes. Wars fought in cyberspace, markets that rise and collapse like tides, political fervor that blinds people to consequences. They are patterns he recognizes because he has seen them countless times before. Every generation believes itself unique, every century believes it has learned, and yet the same cycles repeat. And the Count is there, silent, enduring, cataloging everything. Sometimes he wonders if there will come a day when he is finally understood, when someone will notice the unbroken thread that runs through history and trace it to him. Perhaps then he will be stopped. Perhaps then the sentence of immortality will finally end. But he doubts it. Humanity is rarely capable of seeing the full pattern. It only reacts to fragments, to incomplete stories, to partial truths. And so he waits, watching, remembering, recording, invisible yet inexorably present. He has learned the art of patience over 2 millennia. He has learned that endurance is not passive, it is active observation. It is living without interference, absorbing everything, weighing every change, every trend, every anomaly. He has walked past plagues, fires, wars, revolutions, technological upheavals, and the slow decay of culture, always present, always remembering. And in that remembering, he has become a repository of all human experience, a living archive no institution could ever hope to replicate. And yet, for all the weight he carries, he is lonely beyond comprehension. Companionship is dangerous, attachment is deadly. Those who come too close notice his permanence. Their lives will age, falter, and vanish, while he remains. And so he keeps his distance, watching silently, smiling politely, blending in, always observing. He has learned that true power is not in intervention, not in influence, but in enduring, in witnessing, in remembering when all else is lost. In the quiet hours, when the streets are empty, or the night is thick with rain, he reflects on what he has become. A man unclaimed by death, unburdened by time's normal decay, yet shackled by the endless accumulation of memory. A witness to humanity in every age, he carries the joys, the griefs, the horrors, and the triumphs of countless generations within him. He has become something larger than any one person, yet more isolated than any living being could imagine. And still he walks, through alleys and boulevards, through cafes and offices, past parks and museums, through the noise and the chaos of the modern world, always invisible, always patient, always enduring. He is everywhere and nowhere, a permanent fixture of time itself. He is the Count, the man who has lived beyond memory, and in his endless observation he has learned the ultimate truth. Immortality is not freedom, it is endurance. It is being witness to all that is and all that will be, and never being able to rest, never being able to belong, never being able to die. And in that endless endurance lies the terror. He is a man who cannot be killed, a man who will see all that humans have done and will do, and a man who will remember it all long after the world has forgotten. He is permanence incarnate, and in that permanence he is more terrifying than death itself. Time does not slow for him, but the world does. It stutters forward in bursts of innovation and collapse, moments of brilliance followed by long stretches of decay. He watches generations accelerate their own lives, compressing meaning into shorter spans, living faster, burning brighter, exhausting themselves in decades what once took centuries. He sees children raised by screens, elders forgotten in institutions, entire cultures distilled into data points. And he remembers when memory lived only in stories told by firelight, when forgetting was natural and mercy came with time. Now forgetting is engineered and remembrance is outsourced. He walks through cities where no one looks up. Towers stretch toward the sky like declarations of permanence, yet he knows they will crumble as surely as stone temples once did. He has stood where forests existed before concrete, where oceans receded, where deserts advanced. He has watched coastlines redraw themselves, while maps insisted nothing had changed. Humans argue endlessly about what is real, what is true, what matters, while time erases the argument entirely. He does not argue. He notes, he catalogues, he waits. There are moments, rare, dangerous moments, when he almost intervenes. A hand hesitates at a ledge, a vehicle swerves, a weapon trembles before firing. In those fractions of seconds, memory floods him with the consequences he has already seen 1,000 times. He knows exactly how this will end, and yet he steps back. He always steps back. Intervention changes nothing in the long arc. It only entangles him further in grief. He learned long ago that saving one life often leads to 10 more deaths elsewhere, rippling outward in ways no mortal can predict. So he watches the fall. He hears the impact. He remembers the sound. He has lived long enough to recognize the smell of collapse before it arrives. Societies do not fall suddenly. They rot quietly. Trust erodes. Language loses meaning. Truth becomes flexible. He has seen this pattern repeat under different flags, different gods, different slogans. The names change, the behavior does not. He walks through protests and celebrations alike, knowing both will fade into archival footage that no one will watch in 100 years. He remembers when similar crowds gathered under different banners, convinced they were standing at the center of history. They were not. History moved past them without slowing. In private spaces, in rented rooms and borrowed lives, he maintains his rituals, writing by hand even now, ink on paper, because systems fail and electricity dies. He does not write dates. Dates are meaningless to him. He writes sensations, expressions, patterns. He records how fear sounds different in each century, but always feels the same. He records how love makes people reckless regardless of era. He records how power hollows those who hold it too long. These are the truths that survive when empires do not. He has outlived languages entirely.
Words he once spoke fluently now exist only in fragments carved into stone, misinterpreted by scholars who argue endlessly about pronunciation and meaning. He knows which translations are wrong. He knows which myths were once eyewitness accounts. He knows which gods were men and which men became gods because someone survived long enough to remember them incorrectly. He does not correct the record. He lets error accumulate. Error is part of humanity's signature.
Sometimes he dreams, not of the past, but of endings, not his own, but the world's, ice reclaiming cities, silence stretching across continents, machines running long after their creators are gone, performing functions no longer needed. He does not fear these visions. He has seen partial endings before. He knows the world does not end cleanly. It frays, it lingers, it forgets itself piece by piece, and he will be there for it, standing among ruins that future beings may misname as monuments. There are others occasionally who sense him, children who stare too long, animals that refuse to approach, elderly people who pause mid-sentence, eyes narrowing, as if recognizing something they cannot place. He avoids these moments. Recognition is dangerous. Recognition leads to questions. Questions lead to attention, and attention has always been the most lethal threat. He has learned to move on before curiosity becomes memory. As humanity begins to speak seriously of escaping death, of extending life indefinitely, through science, through machines, through altered bodies, he watches with a quiet internal irony. They chase immortality without understanding it. They imagine endless pleasure, endless time to correct mistakes. He knows better. He knows immortality does not amplify joy, it dilutes it. It does not create meaning, it erodes urgency. It does not free you from fear, it replaces fear of death with fear of exposure, of endless continuation without release. If they succeed, even partially, the world will change in ways they cannot anticipate. He has already seen what happens when time stops claiming those who wield power. He has lived through it repeatedly. Kings who refused to step aside, leaders who clung to relevance long after wisdom had left them. Immortality concentrates stagnation. It does not create enlightenment. And if others like him ever come to exist, the world will not become wiser. It will become unbearable. And still, the Count remains what he has always been, a constant, not a ruler, not a savior, not a god, a witness, a recorder, a presence threading silently through the centuries. He waits without expectation. He observes without judgment. He remembers without mercy. One day, far in the future, long after the names of today have faded, someone or something may find his records. They may piece together the impossible continuity, the unbroken observation stretching back beyond accepted history. They may wonder who could have written such things, who could have seen so much. They will argue, they will speculate, they will never fully understand. And somewhere nearby, unchanged, unaging, unseen, he will be watching them too. Long after that moment when discovery brushes close and then passes without consequence, he resumes his quiet drift through time. He has learned not to anticipate revelation. Truth, when uncovered too early, is dismissed. When uncovered too late, it becomes myth. Humanity prefers stories that comfort, not ones that endure scrutiny. And so his existence remains suspended between disbelief and oblivion, exactly where it has always been safest. He watches the climate change not as catastrophe, but as repetition. He has seen the earth rebel before, seen rivers change course, seen fertile land turn hostile, and hostile land bloom again centuries later. What alarms humanity now is not the change itself, but the speed. Time has begun to move faster for them, compressed by their own ambition. They do not notice the warning signs because they are too busy measuring growth. He has already memorized the outcomes: migration, conflict, collapse disguised as reform, renewal framed as progress. The cycle is intact. He walks through evacuation zones and rebuilt districts alike, listening to the language people use to explain loss. Insurance terms, political blame, scientific estimates. He remembers when loss was explained with prayer, with curses, with gods that demanded sacrifice. The vocabulary has evolved, the fear has not. Fear is the one constant he has never seen change. It sharpens with technology, but never disappears.
As years continue to shorten in his perception, he begins to notice something new. Humanity is becoming aware of time itself. People count seconds obsessively, track productivity, measure lives in metrics and milestones. They speak of legacy more than lineage. They fear being forgotten more than dying. This fascinates him. For most of history, being forgotten was assumed. Now it is resisted. Now people attempt to carve permanence into a world that has never allowed it. He alone knows how futile that effort is. He has stood beside monuments during their unveiling and returned centuries later to stand among their ruins. He has watched names erode from stone, faces lose definition, meanings invert. What was once heroic becomes shameful. What was once condemned becomes romanticized. Time is not kind, and it is not fair. It does not preserve truth, only persistence. And even persistence fades. He sometimes wonders if his role is not accidental, if perhaps he exists not as punishment, but as balance, a single memory immune to erosion, a thread connecting all eras so that something, somewhere, remembers accurately. The thought does not comfort him. Purpose does not lessen duration. Meaning does not soften solitude.
In the quietest hours, when cities dim and networks sleep, he feels the weight most acutely. Silence has changed over the centuries. Once it was vast and natural. Now it is artificial, fragile, broken by distant machines humming in the dark. Even silence no longer belongs to the night. He misses the old dark. He misses stars unpolluted by light. He remembers constellations that no longer exist as such, rearranged by human interpretation rather than celestial movement. There are moments when he tests himself. He stays too long in one place, lets acquaintances notice patterns, lets years pass without altering his appearance. Each time, suspicion grows, jokes are made, then questions, then discomfort. He always leaves before fear hardens into certainty. He has perfected the timing. 2 millennia of practice have taught him exactly when to vanish. He has also learned what never to do: explain. Those rare times when he once tried, centuries ago, the result was always the same. Awe turned to obsession, obsession turned to fear, fear turned to violence. Humanity does not respond well to what it cannot categorize. He has been called miracle, demon, experiment, angel, curse, never simply what he is. A man for whom time failed to function correctly. As exploration pushes outward again, beyond the planet, beyond the familiar, he observes quietly. He has no desire to leave Earth. He has outlived continents. Planets do not impress him. Distance means nothing when duration is infinite. Whether beneath foreign skies or familiar ones, he would remain the same, unchanged, enduring, waiting. He knows he will witness the final silence of this world, not dramatically, not with fire or explosion, but gradually. Systems failing, voices thinning, records ending mid-sentence. He has already seen civilizations die quietly. The end is never loud. It is administrative. It is forgotten maintenance schedules. It is knowledge no longer passed on. It is the last person dying without realizing they were the last. And when that day comes, he will still be there, walking through structures whose purpose no longer matters, reading languages no one speaks, remembering faces no one else ever knew existed, carrying the full, unedited record of humanity within him, while the universe continues indifferent. If another species rises, if another intelligence discovers what was left behind, he may observe them too. He does not speculate much about this. Speculation implies hope or dread. He has learned to exist without either. He is not waiting for death. He is waiting for continuation. Because that is what immortality truly is, not living forever, but never being allowed to stop. And so he walks on. And as he walks on, he begins to understand something that took him longer than any empire to grasp. Time is not his enemy. Hope is. Hope is what destroyed kings, fueled wars, justified atrocities, and convinced entire civilizations that this time would be different. Hope is what made mortals reckless,
Hope is what made them believe consequences belonged to the future and not to themselves. He has seen hope dressed as religion, as progress, as destiny, as salvation. Every age renamed it. Every age was consumed by it. He no longer hopes. He has watched humanity stand on the brink of annihilation and call it innovation. He has watched mercy be reframed as weakness, patience as irrelevance, memory as inconvenience. He has seen truths buried not by time, but by choice. And he has learned that forgetting is not failure, it is survival. The species could not endure if it remembered everything the way he does. That is why he must remain alone. Because if memory were shared fully, if the weight of history were carried by more than one unaging mind, humanity would collapse under the truth of itself. The Count is not a gift. He is containment, a vessel holding what cannot be distributed.
In rare moments, when storms erase cities overnight, when signals go silent, when streets empty faster than anyone expected, he feels something almost like anticipation. Not relief, not fear, recognition. These moments have happened before. They will happen again. The world has practiced endings many times. Humanity simply refuses to call them that. He walks through abandoned places often now, not because he prefers ruin, but because ruins do not ask questions. Cracked walls do not notice unchanged faces. Broken clocks do not accuse him of cheating time. In ruins, he can exist honestly. In ruins, permanence finally feels ordinary. There will come a moment, he knows this with absolute certainty, when no one is left who remembers what the world once was, when myths replace history entirely, when the past becomes aesthetic instead of instruction, when the last archive decays and the final server goes dark, when silence stops being temporary. And he will still be there, standing beneath a sky unclaimed by satellites, walking roads that no longer lead anywhere, remembering names that will never be spoken again. He will remember the first fire, the first lie, the first prayer whispered in fear, the first murder justified as necessity, the first child who asked why people die, the first empire that believed it would last forever. He will remember us exactly as we were, not as heroes, not as villains, but as something unfinished. And perhaps that is his final burden, not merely to witness humanity's end, but to understand that it was never meant to be permanent. Nothing is. Nothing except him. So he continues, not waiting for death, not waiting for salvation, only enduring, because immortality was never about living forever. It was about being unable to leave. And somewhere, right now, As you listen, as the world continues unnoticed outside your window, he is walking past you. You will never recognize him. You will never remember his face. And that is exactly how he survives.
Thank you for listening to Knox Hour. If stories like this, where history, horror, and the unseen collide, keep you awake long after the screen fades to black, then you're already one of us. Subscribe to Knox Hour for long-form dark storytelling, forbidden histories, and the truths that time tried to erase. New shadows arrive every week. Until next time, stay curious, stay listening, and remember, some things don't end when the story does.